him. We went to Scarborough Church. He was doing a series, a health series at the Scarborough Church. And we were so impressed that we decided to invite him to Ajax. And he readily agreed, came to Ajax. We were very impressed with him at Ajax. We were blessed. So there were so many questions asked that we said there wasn't enough time. We said, Dr. Chu, we have to bring him back to Ajax another time. So we bring him back for AY Health Workshop. Just to let you know a little bit about Dr. Chu, he actually works, he's an Adventist naturopathic medicine doctor. He works at the Pathway Clinic, which are naturopathic and nutrition clinics in Toronto that are science-based and focus on using lifestyle medicine to prevent, treat, and reverse today's most common health conditions. So if you're looking for evidence-based naturopathic care that addresses root causes of your health condition, see Dr. Cho. So Dr. Cho, I'm gonna hand over to you now. Of course, there'll be a time afterwards, the audience will be able to ask questions. And if you have any concerns, any question, once Dr. Chu has completed his presentation, you may ask questions. Hand over to you now, Dr. Chu. Thank you for coming back to Ajax.
Hello, everyone, and great to be with you all. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's definitely a privilege. So I am using PowerPoint for those who are on the phone. I apologize that you can't see the PowerPoint, but we are using PowerPoint here. So I hope you all been well, especially during coronavirus, and that you nor your loved ones have been affected by COVID-19. Some of you probably heard that that there's going to be a second wave. So I think it's really important for us to ask the question, how do we survive something like COVID-19? And if there's another future pandemic, what are we going to do about that? Is there a way, or does the science show that lifestyle principles can help us beat viral conditions like COVID-19? That's kind of what I want to explore today, surviving the next pandemic. If I were to give another title, it'd be a collision of two pandemics and how to avoid the next one. So I believe that if you look at the scientific evidence, we are seeing the massive collision of two great pandemics. All right. And I want to kind of unpack that with you today. Okay. Just before we begin, this is for educational purposes only. So please speak with the healthcare provider before applying any of this information. So what I want to argue today is that COVID-19 we're seeing a collision between COVID-19 and other major chronic diseases like obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. All right, so what we're seeing right now is a massive collision between these two great health issues. And the amazing thing, though, for us as Seventh-day Adventists is that the scientific evidence is very clear that our health message can really help with both of these conditions. All right, so that's kind of what I want to unpack with you today. All right. So first, let's set the stage a little bit so we kind of get some context. Okay. If you look at the world's COVID-19 cases, the death rate is approximately 3% of all those who get COVID-19, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. 3% of cases end up in death. Okay. But interestingly enough, about 67% of those who get COVID-19 actually fully recover. All right. And the rest are they're active cases. This might be surprising to some of you because if you look at the news and the media, it looks like people are dying left, right, and center, and that COVID-19 is almost kind of like a death sentence, but that's not true. If you look at the scientific evidence, and you can look it up yourself, this data is readily available. The death rate is about 3%, and the vast majority, or the majority of people actually recover. All right. Is not to minimize the deaths, absolutely not. We're not trying to minimize any deaths here, but we're just looking at the percentages. All right. Now, if you look at the United States, the death rate is about 3% as well. And they have 37% who's fully recovered, and the rest are still active cases. Now, let's go to Canada. Canada is actually very interesting. Check this out. In Canada, the death rate is actually 7%. Okay, so if you get all the cases of Canadians who've been who've got COVID-19, at least the ones who've been documented, the death rate is about 7%, all right, of cases. But get this, 88% of those who've gotten COVID-19 in Canada, as far as we've documented, is they've recovered fully, 88%. Okay, and then rest are active cases. So what can we kind of conclude here based on this evidence? Okay, as you can see here, the majority of people can actually get infected by SARS-CoV-2. Okay, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes COVID-19. So the majority of people who get COVID-19 can actually successfully defeat COVID-19. Okay, I hope that's clear, right? The majority of people who get coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, can actually defeat it, all right? This is not the message that you typically, it's not the impression that you get when you listen to the media, but this is the scientific data, all right? So way more people recover than die from COVID-19, especially in Canada, all right? And this is globally as well, okay? Again, it's not to minimize the deaths, okay? Certainly not. We're not trying to minimize deaths at all. But we're looking at the point we're trying to drive home is that there's actually a lot of people who are getting COVID-19 and actually successfully defeating it, okay? Okay, so our immune system can defeat SARS-CoV-2. Okay, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that's causing COVID-19. Okay, the SARS-CoV-2 virus. Okay, so you can be infected by SARS-CoV-2, but you could actually defeat it. Okay, that's kind of the point here. All right. Now, some of you might be saying, "Oh, are we sure about that? How a vaccine?" Well, of course, we all know there is no vaccine yet. Okay, so you can't give vaccine the credit for those recoveries. Okay, I think that should be clear. There's no vaccine yet. All right. How about medication? Well, certainly there are doctors that are using different drugs, but the vast majority of people are actually being told to go home and recover. They're not being given medication. And in fact, they're very slow right now to actually approve drugs to be used to fight COVID-19. So I do not believe that the answer is actually in drugs. Okay, the recoveries that we're seeing is actually not really due to drugs. Okay, though I'm pretty sure a lot of people benefited from taking some type of medication, but the majority of cases I don't think we can attribute to these drugs. All right. How about ventilators? Some of you might be saying, okay, well, maybe it's the ventilators. You might remember when this pandemic was starting, everyone was in consternation about the lack of ventilators, and they're saying, we need more ventilators. So was it the ventilators? Is it the ventilators that's saving people's lives? Okay, well, check this out. You see these pie graphs, these pie charts. The red represents the percentage of people who've been put on a ventilator but actually did not make it. Okay, so you can see here in New York, thousands of patients that are studied, 60% of people put on a ventilator actually still died. In fact, you can see here only 17% were actually discharged. Okay, those percentages are not good. Okay, you can see in England, 66.3% death rate. In a study from Wuhan, China, 81% of people put on a ventilator actually died, even though they're put on a ventilator. All right, and in Seattle, a small study, half of the people put on a ventilator still died. Okay, so basically, what you can learn from this is ventilators do save lives. However, the percentages are not that great. Okay, I think that's pretty clear. All right, and so ventilators do save lives, but the numbers are actually not that good. Right, so I don't think it's actually the ventilators that we can attribute the majority of people who are actually surviving. Okay, and I think it should make sense. By the time that you need a ventilator, your disease has progressed quite significantly that it becomes very difficult to bring you back. All right, so basically, we don't want to get to the point where we actually need a ventilator. All right, and in fact, the majority of people who recover actually do not need a ventilator. They're actually just recovering at home. All right. So it's not really the vaccines. I don't think we can really attribute it to vaccines or even the medications. Okay. It's our immune system. Okay. In fact, even if you're given a drug, you still need your immune system to really do the work. Okay. So really the point is that in a lot of people across the world, they're getting COVID-19, but their immune system is actually successfully defeating the virus. Okay, I hope that that makes sense. All right. So then that leads us to ask this very simple question. Okay, how come the 7% of individuals in Canada or the 3% across the world, how come their immune systems failed while the majority of people who survived, who recovered, so for example, the 67% across the world or the 81, 88% uh, of Canadians, how come their immune systems succeeded in defeating the virus? Okay, so small number of people, their immune systems failed. The majority of people, their immune systems succeeded. So what is it about the 7% where their immune systems were compromised to the point where they were not able to defeat a virus, which most people can defeat? That is a very important question that we need to ask, and that is not really being addressed if you look at the media and so forth. But if you look at the scientific evidence that's coming out, the answer it becomes quite clear, or you get a strong answer when you look at the scientific evidence. So let's take a look at that. In order to understand what is happening for people who get very severe COVID-19, you have to understand something called cytokine storm. Okay, so you have to understand cytokine storm. Okay, so what in the world is cytokine storm? All right. So you see the red thing here, that is the virus. Okay, it's a virus. The green circle is your immune cell. Okay, it could be the natural killer cell, it could be a macrophage, whatever it is, it's an immune cell. Now, when your immune cell detects a virus, your immune cell is going to release these proteins called cytokines. Okay, you see those little blue circles, they represent proteins that are called cytokines. Cytokines are messengers that activate other immune cells. Basically, it's your immune system sending a message to your other soldiers, telling them, hey, we found an enemy. We need to get into the fight. We need to recruit more soldiers to fight this enemy. Okay, that's what cytokines do. All right. So as you could assume then from the name cytokine storm, cytokine storm means that there's a lot of cytokines. All right. So a lot of cytokines are activating a lot of immune cells. All right. And when people die from COVID-19, they often present with cytokine storm. Okay. Now I hope you're following. Now, some of you who are, if you're thinking, you might be scratching your head because you're wondering, wait a moment, wait a second, wouldn't more immune cells actually be better? Wouldn't it be better to actually have more soldiers? How come having more soldiers is leading to death? Wouldn't more soldiers actually increase your chance of survival? I think that is a if you have that question, that's you're thinking, and that's a good thing. But uh, it's kind of like a good way to illustrate it is using police and the military. Okay, now of course this I understand that right now with certain social issues in the United States, this illustration might not be a perfect illustration, but I think you all kind of appreciate what I'm trying to get at. Okay, but I do recognize that given some of the stuff that's happening in the States, this might not be the best illustration, but I think you will get the point though. So please excuse me here. So when the cops usually get involved, usually the damage is not that great, right? So usually, there's like a little robbery or like maybe a domestic violence or something like that. and the cops are called, and usually there's not too much collateral damage, right? Maybe some shots are fired, uh, some bullet holes, and some things get damaged, right? But usually the damage is not that great. Okay. However, if something gets really serious and then the military is called, you would all agree that when there's total war, that there's a lot of collateral damage, right? Buildings are destroyed, whole cities are going to be bombed, millions, thousands of lives are going to be destroyed. It's just when the military and total war happens, there's just a lot of innocent people, a lot of just collateral damage. All right, and I think this it helps us understand why cytokine storm is actually could be detrimental. When you have overreaction of your immune system, you actually get a lot of collateral damage even to healthy cells. All right, and that's exactly what's happening with COVID-19. You have this orange thing here, that's the virus. When the virus enters the lung, your immune system activates. But when your immune system is compromised and it can't handle the virus, it starts to overreact. Okay. And therefore, tons of immune cells are brought to the site of infection. And as a result, healthy lung cells are going to be destroyed. Fluid is going to start to build up in the lungs. And you can imagine if you have a balloon, you have an empty balloon, it's very easy to blow the balloon up, right? It's very easy to inflate. But what if you put water in the balloon? It's gonna be harder. What if fibrosis happens? So fibrosis occurs in the lungs. That means thickening, hardening. All right. So what if that happens in a balloon? It's gonna be hard to blow up the balloon. It's exactly the same thing in your lung. When your lungs start to get attacked by even your own immune cells, then the body reacts by putting fibrous tissue to try to protect it. Right. Same with your fluid. The fluid buildup is a defense mechanism. All right. But unfortunately, in this case, it's actually your own immune cells that's causing the damage. All right. So this is the problem with cytokine storm. All right. It's an overreaction of your immune system. Okay. And in many cases of death in COVID-19 and serious COVID-19, this is the process that's happening. All right. So so the question then we have to ask is, so what can aggravate cytokine storm? Right? That is the question. How come the 7%? What really drove them to get to the point where they're having cytokine storm? Okay, and friends, if you're looking at the scientific evidence, it becomes very clear. This is a study here that's done, looking at a bunch of studies that they did on patients with COVID-19, and look here: hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. These are major comorbidities that puts people at increased risk for severe COVID-19 and death from COVID-19. Look at that. Cardiovascular disease, almost 419% increased risk. Diabetes, 268. Hypertension, 172% increased risk. All right. These are chronic diseases caused by poor lifestyle habits. All right. In a study in New York, they looked at about 4,000 or 5,000 people with COVID-19 being hospitalized. 42% of those who were hospitalized were obese. 19% were morbidly obese. This means that over half, the majority of people being hospitalized in this particular New York study of over 4,000, close to 5,000 people, the majority of them had excess weight. All right. So that should tell us something. Okay. Here you look, this is a study from France. All right. And among lean patients, so people kind of skinny patients with COVID-19, 41% needed to be put on a ventilator. But among the severely obese patients, 81% of them had to be put on a ventilator. All right. Essentially, they're probably really close to getting cytokine storm, or they already had cytokine storm. All right. You can see here, high BMI, 245% increased risk of needing a ventilator. 600% increased risk for those who had severe obesity. Right? And remember what we said before, by the time you need a ventilator, often it's often too late, right? It's not just having excess weight, it's where you have the weight. So in this study here, looking at COVID-19 patients, they looked at visceral fat. Now, visceral fat is fat buildup in the abdominal area, okay, around the abdominal organs. Okay, you can see here, the more visceral fat somebody has, the more they're gonna likely gonna need intubation, okay, invasive care, okay, intensive care. Okay, so what is it about obesity and excess weight? How come that leads people to have cytokine storm? Okay, well, check this out. You can see here the orange circle, the orange thing here. This is the virus, the SARS-CoV-2, the COVID-19 virus, is going to enter the cell. Okay, when it infects a cell, that cell is going to start releasing cytokines. Okay, it's the green circles here. You see the green circles. Okay, it's being released, and you see the immune cells are being activated. So the cytokines are activating other immune cells. Okay, but you notice here, you see the red circles. Those are also cytokines. Where are those cytokines coming from? Okay, where are those extra cytokines coming from? Well, it's from fat cells. All right, fat cells actually release cytokines, regardless of whether they're infected or not. They just do. That's what fat cells do. All right. So if you have an infection like COVID-19, and then your body starts to pump out cytokines, then you got fat cells that are adding extra cytokines. Then what's that going to result in? Cytokine storm, right? So that's exactly what's happening. So when we carry excess fat, already we're in a metabolic milieu of high cytokines, inflammation. All right. And so then when you add an infection into the mix, it's like a perfect storm. It's like adding fuel to the fire. All right. And it's going to just blow things up. So that's what's happening. Okay. So this is why uh, maintaining a more lean profile, not skinny. I mean, you don't have to be skinny, but when we want to really avoid being having excess weight, unnecessary weight. Okay. So here, now there's a few other things we have to also recognize as well. Okay, so you see the red arrows pointing to something called ACE2. Okay, do you see that? ACE2. That's angiotensin converting enzyme 2. That is the receptor that the virus uses to enter the body. All right. Lo and behold, fat cells actually have the ACE2 receptor. Therefore, when we carry more fat cells, we have more receptors for the virus to actually come into the body. All right. So that's another detriment as well. Okay. Also, you notice here the arrows pointing to something called the NK. Okay. NK means natural killer cells. Natural killer cells are your immune cells. These are very important immune cells. One of your frontline soldiers that goes and attacks cancer cells and infections. Right. What happens is when people carry excess weight in the obese state, the activity of your natural killer cells is actually weaker. So it's very interesting in an obese individual, their natural killer cells actually are not working as optimally, right? So then it makes you weaker it makes you less able to fight off infections, all right? So on multiple levels, you can see that carrying excess weight is really quite not optimal. And of course, obesity leads to diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease, which are other major comorbidities, as I've shown you for COVID-19. All right. So this is notice here. This is a quote from two researchers writing about COVID-19. Okay, these are published recently. Okay, about COVID-19, the pandemic. Look what they say. The first pandemic of the 21st century, so the COVID-19 pandemic, uncovered the sinister relationship between obesity and morbidity upon viral infection. Today, COVID-19 has exploited our increasingly obese world in its global spread. So you see, the obesity pandemic or obesity epidemic really set the stage for COVID-19 to really take its toll. Okay, that's what they're really saying. All right, so to close off here, so what can be done, right? So we know that obesity leads to diabetes and heart disease and hypertension, which makes us at greater risk for severe COVID-19. So what can we do? People are saying that the second wave is coming, and of course, in the future, there's going to be more pandemics, right? We'd be foolish to think that there's going to be no more pandemics, right? That this is the last pandemic. No, there's going to be more pandemics, right? So what can we do? How can we help ourselves and also our loved ones and our children to prepare for another pandemic that is likely going to come, okay? Of course, the answer is very simple. For us as Seventh-day Adventists is to follow the Adventist health principles, all right? So I want to challenge you to follow these things, okay? And we do this with our patients at the clinic, whether they have obesity or not, okay? Whether they have diabetes, hypertension, or just healthy, we encourage people to do these things, and they do very well, okay? So first is a whole foods plant-based diet, okay? And a whole foods plant-based diet does not mean just eating salads, all right? It doesn't mean that. In fact, you don't need to eat salads to be healthy. Okay, you don't have to eat salad to be healthy, right? You should eat vegetables, but it doesn't have to be salads, right? So just a whole food plant-based diet, emphasizing vegetables and fruits, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. Stick with breakfast and lunch. Try to skip out on the dinner. If you're very physically active, then you might need a third meal. That's fine. But if you're not as active, then you could skip out on the third meal. Okay, most people can do better without that. Okay, 5 to 6 hours between meals, no snacking. Okay, so just eat breakfast and then lunch and nothing in between. If you want to have a third meal, then do juicing or some type of smoothie. That's cool. Okay, try to stick with water as much as possible. All right, herbal teas are fine, but water. Okay, and the guideline that we use for people is your urine should be pale in color, not bright yellow. Okay, pale, clear color. All right. Early to bed. All right. And of course, physical activity about 150 minutes per week of moderate to vigorous. That means about 25 minutes per day, approximately. All right. Of aerobic activity. So like running, jogging, brisk walking, vigorous cycling, stuff like that. So 150 minutes per week is the Canadian physical activity guideline. All right. Um, and of course, strengthening activities, they recommend about 2 times a week, targeting all the major muscle groups. All right. This is for both adults and also for seniors as well. All right. So that would be good. And of course, us as Seventh-day Adventists, we've been promoting a plant-based diet for a very long time, right, over 100 years. And we also recognize Ellen White does talk a lot about exercise and the importance of being physically active. When God created Adam and Eve, he gave them physically active occupation to keep and tend the garden, which is physical activity, right? So physical activity is an integral part of our being, all right? Okay. Also, another thing that we have to do as Adventists is to share the Adventist health message with our family, friends, and loved ones. All right. So it's not good enough to just keep the message to ourselves. We need to share this message with others. I think the last time when I was with you, I think I shared about how Seventh-day Adventists reached my family through the health message. They came and shared us about health, and that's how we became Seventh-day Adventists. So, and the person that shared the message with us, the health message, was not a doctor. He was not a scientist. He was not a researcher, nothing like that. He's just a normal Seventh-day Adventist, just a regular layperson, all right? But he shared it with us, and that's how we got into the church. So share, even if you're not a doctor, even if you're not a healthcare professional or not a professor, it doesn't matter. You can still share these principles with your friends and family and people that you care about. They'll be richly blessed by it. Okay, and I'm a living example of that. People reach my family because they share with us the health message. Ellen White says here, when properly conducted, the health work is an entering wedge which will make an opening for other truths to find entrance to the heart. Okay, and the coronavirus pandemic that we're in the middle of right now, it really emphasizes why we as Seventh-day Adventists, we have to really be sharing the health message with people, and when we minister to people in that way, it will open their hearts up to other gospel truths as well. Okay, that happened with our family. And of course, we know that in China, the pandemic started with people eating unclean meat, right? The wet markets in China is really the origin of this pandemic. They're eating pangolins and they're eating bats and uh, uh, even snakes and pork and all that kind of stuff. So really, we have a big responsibility here to share with the rest of the world. Because there's parts in the world where they're eating really weird stuff. And as an Asian person, I could say, people in my part of the world, they're eating a lot of weird stuff. And so we have a message to share that people should be eating a little bit more cleaner, right? And this and going back to the personal ministry, I love this quote by Ellen White from the book Ministry of Healing. Look what she says here. Everywhere there is a tendency to substitute the work of organizations for individual effort. Multitudes leave to institutions and organizations the work of benevolence. They excuse themselves. Christ commits to his followers an individual work, a work that cannot be done by proxy. Ministry to the sick and the poor, the giving of the gospel to the lost, is not to be left to committees or organized charities. Individual responsibility, individual effort, personal sacrifice is the requirement of the gospel. So, the information I'm sharing with you and our health message, don't wait for your health ministries department at your church, at Ajax SDA. Don't wait for them to initiate everything. We as individuals, we have people in our family and people that we meet, and we can just go out and just start sharing these principles. We don't need to be a doctor to share these things, and we don't need to wait for a health committee. We don't need to wait for the pastor to initiate this stuff. We as Seventh-day Adventists, each one of us as individuals can go and just share this information with people. And again, that's how I was reached, my family. And so I want to encourage everyone to really share this information with others. And if there's ever a time that people needed it, it's really now. The obesity epidemic is going up. Diabetes is going up. All these chronic diseases going up, and I believe that coronavirus will go away, but there's going to be another one coming. And so we need to help people. So in closing here, I just want to share a few closing thoughts. First, the most potent defense against pathogens is not outside of you, it's inside of you. It's your own immune system, okay? It's not a vaccine, though vaccine is fine. If you want to take the vaccine, I mean, that's your choice, right? But really, your immune system needs to be strong, all right? In the vast majority of cases, nothing is more reliable than your own immune system. Even vaccines, you have to get booster shots for many vaccines, ventilators, I showed you, ventilators don't necessarily save a lot of lives. So it does save some lives, but in fact, the majority of people actually still end up dying. So the most reliable thing you have is a optimally functioning immune system. That's what you have to rely on. And nothing replaces actually living a healthy lifestyle. Nothing. No med, no vaccine, no ventilator, nothing replaces your actually having a healthy lifestyle. Okay. Now, it's very interesting here. If you look at prior pandemics, we're actually seeing a very similar pattern. So this is not just unique to coronavirus. Okay, check this out. This was written just a few months ago about COVID-19. Okay, and these scientists are looking back at previous pandemics, and look what they're noticing here. Since the Spanish influenza or the Spanish flu of 1918 is known that malnutrition, both under and over nutrition, is linked to a worse prognosis. The 1957, 1960 Asian, and the 1968 Hong Kong influenzas confirm that obesity and diabetes lead to a higher mortality. Okay. During the 2009 influenza A pandemic, H1N1. Some of you might remember H1N1. Obesity was also linked to increased risk of severe disease and a risk factor for hospitalization and death. So the question is, how many more pandemics do we need to before we learn our lesson? Okay, Spanish flu, Hong Kong, Asian, and H1N1. They all show that obesity and even diabetes predisposes people to more severe prognosis. Okay, so really, it's about time that we all as a society learned our lesson. Okay. Bonnie Henry is the health officer for BC. She said we never had a pandemic in recorded history that has not had a second wave. So, and of course, we're already hearing, that a second wave is coming. So, if there was ever a time that I encourage everyone here to start living a healthy life, it is now. And if there's ever a time that we need to start sharing with people, it is definitely now. And I want to encourage everyone to do that. Okay. So what we're seeing with COVID-19 is a major collision between two great health issues: poor lifestyle habits and chronic diseases, and then a viral infection. And in the future, there's going to be another one, and we need to be ready. We need to get ready for that inevitable collision. Okay, and we have a choice to make. And lastly, go out and share this information with others. All right, so they can also be ready as well. All right, so I hope that you're able to follow along with that. I'm willing to take any questions that you have, if there are any. And maybe someone can help moderate that.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. That was very, very informative. A lot of pertinent information that we all could benefit and will benefit from. Now, has anybody got any questions for Dr. Chu in here? A lot of
Yes, I could start off.
benefit and will. I'm sorry, I'm hearing several voices. Has anybody got any questions for Dr. Chu in here? A lot of
Yes, I could start off.
benefit and will. I'm sorry, I'm hearing several voices. Yes, there are several voices at the same time. I think there's feedback going on. Could you raise your hand, please?
So we have Sister
I'm
Mac.
hearing several voices. Yes, there are several voices at the same time. I think there's feedback going on. Could you raise your hand, please? Lance, there's a delay on here. I'm hearing myself several seconds after I speak. Feedback. Lance, there's a delay on here. I'm hearing myself several seconds after I speak. Feedback. There's a delay on here.
Okay,
I'm hearing myself
Sister
several
Mac?
seconds after I speak.
You've got your hand up. You can go ahead.
This is not Sister Mac.
There's a delay on
Max,
here.
okay,
I'm hearing myself
Sister
several
Mac?
seconds after I speak.
All right, Lance.
Go ahead.
This is not Sister Mac.
There's a delay on here.
Max,
I'm
okay,
hearing myself
Sister
several
Mac?
seconds after I speak.
All right, Lance.
Go ahead. We've got one person
that's
with their
Sister
hand
Mac.
up. Do you want to proceed and ask your questions?
I'm
Okay,
hearing myself
Sister
several
Mac?
seconds after I speak.
All right, Lance.
Go ahead. We've got one person
that's
with their
Sister
hand
Mac.
up. Do you want to proceed and ask your questions? Okay.
Lance, I don't know if you can hear me. It's Jennifer.
Yep.
All right, Lance.
There's some serious technical issues happening here at the moment.
Do you want to
What
proceed?
repeats are happening? Lance, I don't know if you can hear me. It's Jennifer.
Yes. Yep.
All right, Lance.
There's some.
Okay, so hang on. Okay, so are we better now?
Yes, I think that's better now.
Okay, so we had Max with their hand up. So why don't they go ahead and ask their question?
Could you take Dr. Chu's screen down for us as well, please?
Okay,
Okay. Can I go ahead now?
go ahead.
All right. So it's a question for the doc. But I don't want to lean on the side of any conspiracy. But so given the measures that have been taken in terms of the whole, with this whole COVID-19 thing, with having persons cooped up in their homes, so the second wave inevitably will be worse, seeing that we're all home putting on some pounds for most of us, and not being able, for a long while, weren't able to go outside to enjoy the crisp, fresh air, and the parks were blocked off, and all these things. So we I think, as you're saying, we should be preparing now to see the numbers skyrocket in a few months or a few weeks, as we go into the cold and flu season, quote unquote. Right? Is that would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, thank you for the comment and the question. I personally hope you're wrong, but I'm afraid you might be right. It's very unfortunate. There's articles, there's actually scientists writing in the peer-reviewed journals about, like, for example, physical activity, and they're saying, unfortunately, the message that people got when people said, when our authorities told us, shelter in place, the message that we got was don't go out at all, but that was not supposed to be the message. People still should have been going out and exercising and taking a walk and stuff like that, right? But unfortunately, there was so much panic that we thought, okay, just stay home and don't go anywhere, and as you said, that probably would have weakened us, weakened the population. So could the second wave be worse? In the Spanish flu, the second wave was worse. And so this could happen again. I don't know. I hope you're wrong, but you might very well be right. So we're gonna have to see what happens. But yes, I think for next time, I think it's an important lesson that we should still go out and exercise and get out in the sun. Vitamin D is very important for our immune system as well. So yeah, you make a very valid point and a very valid concern as well. So let's see what happens.
Dr. Chu, I don't know if anyone would be asking this question, but there's a lot of talk about organic foods today, based on the fact that most of the foods that we're able to get on the shelves, or the greens and vegetables and so on in the supermarket, are genetically modified in some way. Any suggestions on that, please?
I think that if people can get non-modified foods, organic, I think that's a very good thing. But if it's not financially feasible for people, then it's still better to eat fruits and vegetables, and to stick with a plant-based diet, even if it may not be organic. If we're worried about food that's being tampered with, animal foods are actually very much tampered with. These animals are being injected with growth hormones, antibiotics, and things like that. They're reared to be unnaturally large and so forth. So I really think that it's still better to go plant-based even if it's not necessarily organic. If people can get organic, then that is the best, obviously.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions from anyone, please?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, Brother Basil, go ahead.
Dr. Chu, you really, your discussion today really brought it home to me, especially when you mentioned about ventilators cannot save lives. Because my sister-in-law in New York, she was a healthcare worker, and she passed earlier this year due to COVID virus. And they actually had her on a ventilator. So you're perfectly correct that ventilators cannot save lives. And but my question really have to do with the correlation between the obesity and the angiotensin 2 receptor.
Yes.
I don't know if whether or not you might be able to answer this question at this time, but I was actually wondering, because there are hypertensive patients who currently take angiotensin 2 receptor blockers.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, does it help to prevent? Are there any studies done whether or not it's actually prevent them from actually contracting the COVID virus?
That's a really good question, and definitely scientists have noticed that, and right now they're not exactly sure, because it could be. They're not sure, but they do recommend that people still take their drugs. But they're not exactly sure exactly how those medications might interplay with COVID-19. So that is a good question. If you're on your medication, speak with your doctor um, and listen to their advice. But it's a very interesting connection that they're still trying to explore, you know. But that is a very interesting observation for sure. Yeah.
Thank you for your response. Any
Now,
other question?
I want to make clear, ventilators do save lives. It's just the percentages just aren't that great, you know. So I think that we can't have false hope in ventilators for sure. Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody else?
Yes,
Yeah.
I have a question. I think my hand is up.
Okay, go ahead, Judy.
Yes, Dr. Cho, thank you so much for coming and for your very effective presentation. I just want to know though, with coronavirus, apparently people in the poor communities and people of color were hit really hard by this virus. Based on what you said this evening, if some of your principles are followed, will there be a decrease if there is a second wave with poorer communities and people of color?
Yes. In New York, I believe I read a report where they're noticing that blacks and Hispanics are disproportionately being affected, dying. That is. From COVID-19. And obviously there's probably a lot of different factors at play. But I do believe, like you recognize, that if these principles are implemented, that it should help. So I really hope that people of color, that would include myself, I guess, people of minorities and disadvantaged groups, that we could all start implementing a lot of these principles. And I do believe that it should help. You know, it should help. You know, there are systemic things that might be hard to change, and I think we all know what those are. But you know, there are also individual things that we can do, right? So I think that's where individual lifestyle choices can play a role. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And there was somebody else there. Was it you, Lance?
Yeah, one thing I think in terms of people who are poor, one thing in the United States, they seem to have cheaper food and more availability of high fructose and whatnot foods that the people who are poor in the U.S. have access to that typically wouldn't be sold in a place like Canada. I mean, we do have our issues with food also, but I noticed that in the U.S. they seem to have even like with something like meat, they have way more grades of meat that you can buy in the supermarket in the US. And what that does is it basically gives access to people who have low means to buy even poorer or worse food than someone who is a bit more established. And then obviously that has its own result in terms of what we're seeing. But even as a Black community, we do have to realize that a lot of us eat high sodium diets that basically are not in conjunction with what we believe. And the result is our weight issues and hypertension, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for pointing that out. That's a very valid point.
One of the
Pastor
things
Maitland's
that,
hand is up.
okay, Pastor Maitland, go
You
ahead,
ready
please.
for my question? Yeah,
Yes,
my
sir.
question is, Dr. Cho, thanks for the presentation. One of our ministers had COVID-19 earlier this year, and the doctors called his wife and told her that they're going to put him on a ventilator. The wife said, under no condition do I want my husband on a ventilator. And she called around and asked for the prayer warriors to get on and pray, and prayed for him. And within half an hour, they called back to her and let her know that we don't think there's reason for ventilator. He's not responding to the treatment that we are giving him. should that be our position if and when the COVID strikes a family member and the option is to go to a ventilator or not to go? What would you advise?
I think I really so that person survived, Pastor Maitland?
Yes, he did. He did survive. Yes, he
Praise God.
didn't need the ventilator eventually.
Yeah, okay. You know, I'm gonna have to plead a little bit of ignorance here. I'm not an emergency doctor and I'm not really too well versed in that area. All I can do is I can just read the facts, which is that a lot of people put on ventilators still die, and there are some people who do survive. So it does seem like some people do benefit from ventilators. So I'm not sure exactly how to answer that question, unfortunately. So yeah, I'm gonna have to plead a little bit of ignorance here, and I hope that you forgive me.
That's all right.
Yeah. I would
That's all right.
I would add to that though that prayer should be a natural activity when we do have somebody who is sick and that critical, irrespective of the treatment that's been administered in the medical facility. My own family in England, the doctors pronounced her dead and they called the children to come and do whatever. And when they got there, they were told she hasn't taken her last breath yet. So, you know, sometimes the doctors feel that there's nothing else that can be done and they give up. She's now at home and doing quite well, thank you. Prayers made a difference combined with the medical professionals and the care that they give. So I do believe that prayer obviously made a huge difference with that Pastor Maitland speaking about, but we should never, ever underestimate the power of prayer, irrespective of the condition of the person or whatever treatment has been administered.
Yeah, certainly.
Yes. Any other questions from anyone?
Yes, I totally agree with Sister Husbands, because I know of at least one person here in Ajax, another person in the GTA, whereby they were actually on deathbed. And we prayed, the church prayed, especially during the 100 days of prayer. And now the Lord turned around the circumstances. The gentleman, this guy, he had like a quadruple bypass surgery. He could not walk. He was actually, basically, he was on the verge of death. Now the gentleman is telling me that he's walking for half an hour because we prayed, the church came together and prayed for him. And now he miraculously turned around of his circumstances. And there are at least two persons, one with cancer, and this other gentleman who was actually miraculously cured, miraculously healed by the Lord. So I do believe in the power of prayer. Of course, I do believe in medicine. I have to. This is part of my job, but I also believe in prayer.
Yes.
And we have someone on our multiple people on the prayer scroll, that we had one guy who had cancer and the doctors had given up, and now that gentleman is mowing his lawn. The actual cancer has gone into remission, and that was someone who the Ajax church was praying for on the prayer list, the prayer scroll that we have. So I do believe we are seeing the Lord work using prayer, and we do have to consider prioritizing that also.
Yes. Wonderful.
Dr. Cho?
Yes.
Yes. Elder Boyce, thank you for your presentation this evening. I have a question. My question is in regards to seniors. The church is looking to get back into the sanctuary. What would you say to us as a church leadership as to how we go about getting back into the facility and seniors being involved there? How should we treat that?
Yeah, that is you're talking about like going back to worship.
But yeah, back into the facility. We do have a committee right now looking at getting us back into the sanctuary. So in regards to seniors who are more at high risk, what would you say to the church leadership as to how we face back in there and think about our seniors?
That's really good. Now, if you look at scientific evidence, the even among seniors, the majority of seniors can still, who've gotten COVID, actually survive. Okay. So it's true that the majority of deaths are among seniors, but the majority of seniors still survive. I hope that makes sense. So, but of course, those with comorbidities are at increased risk. Of course, social physical distancing the chairs, temperature checks, and maybe even masks and things like that, hand sanitizing. I think all that is a given. But I think maybe trying to pinpoint seniors with comorbidities, I think that would be, I think, a good start, as in maybe encouraging them to
The underlying conditions, right?
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Seniors with diabetes and maybe even obesity and heart disease and stuff like that. I think we need to be very cautious with them. But
Mhm.
a healthy senior, though, by any like they I mean, they have an increased risk, but it's still a good chance they could survive. I mean, we don't want to get it in the first place, but even if they do get it, they can still survive quite well. So I think that would be a way to kind of maybe divide up the seniors. So those who with underlying conditions versus those who do not. So I think
Okay.
that's a good place to start.
All right.
Okay. And Brother Boyce, would there still be the online service going on?
Yes, there will still be online services. As you know, the church does have a committee looking into this. I know they have a meeting with the host church in regards to how they communicate and getting us back into the facilities. So more information will come to the church family as this before we head back in there.
Yeah, actually, that's handling online services with Judy. And so we basically purchased the equipment, and we're in the process of running through some trials in terms of how we will present the service from church, so that people who are not at church, they can access the service in a similar way that we're doing now. So that's in progress, and there's a team working on that. Effectively, we will end up doing a combination of Zoom that we have now, because we know that most of our seniors actually call in on their phone to engage in the service. And then for those people who have laptops and whatnot, the service will be similar. So we are with the communications team, we are working to have a online version of the service that integrates Zoom with the actual folks who are at church, so everyone will still be involved.
Wonderful. Any other questions before we wrap up? Lance, what time do we wrap up here? Okay.
Usually we wrap up. You're like on time, so I mean,
How much more time do we have?
you have like maybe 20 minutes.
Okay. Have we got any more questions for Dr. Chu? Anyone? No? Okay. So Dr. Chu, I want to personally say thank you so much for this presentation. Very informative, very helpful, ties in very well with this morning's presentation as well. And we've got a lot that we can take away from here. And for me, especially, when you spoke of not waiting for a committee at church to propel us to go out and share the message, if I didn't get anything from this presentation today, that really struck home for me. We need to share the gospel, share the health message, encourage people in their lives to do better, teach people how to eat better. And, when people have a healthy body, their mind is also more receptive to accepting the scripture. Thank you very much for reminding us of that. And may God bless you in your ministry. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here. It's a privilege to speak to all of you.
Thank you. Brother Vassal, did you want to add anything here?
Just to thank Dr. Chu for coming by us. On behalf of the Ajax SDA Health Ministry Department, I want to thank you for your very articulate, educational, and spirit-filled presentation. We look forward to improving our lifestyle by, making more healthy choices, so as to improve our immune cells and to better protect ourselves against this coronavirus. We pray that the Lord will continue to bless you, Dr. Chu, bless your family, and bless your work, and also bless your ministry. And thank you for coming back to us once more here at Ajax. Really appreciate you coming back to talk to us. May God bless you.
Anytime.
Now, Dr. Chu, one more question that has come to mind. We spoke about nutrition and healthy eating habits. We didn't speak about children who resist healthy eating. Any suggestions as how we can approach that with younger children, please, before you go?
Well, I'm no expert in this area, but I can speak from personal experience. So
Yes.
when my mother encountered the Seventh-day Adventist who shared with us a health message,
Mm-hmm.
my parents owned a convenience store, and so we had my brother and my sister. We had junk food. We had a lot of junk food. It was a very common part of our diet. We're eating a lot of meat, pork, and all that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and white rice and things like that. But when the Seventh-day Adventists came to share with us that health message, our mother started to implement changes. And I can say at first we didn't like it, but children are moldable, and we came to adapt. Now, so we know at first we didn't really like it, but then we changed, right? The important thing is though that our mother, she didn't force us to become vegetarians.
Mm-hmm.
When we were out with our dad, he fed us meat and we ate chicken and all that kind of stuff. But when we were about 13 or 14 years old, we started to read some Adventist books. Ellen White's books on counsels on diet and foods. We started to read that book. And we started to read some books by Dr. Hans Deal. Maybe some of you know Dr. Hans Deal. They sent the Adventist, wrote a book called The Power of Choice or something like that. It was about health. We started to read that as young people. We were like 13, 14 years old. And through reading those books, we start to realize that the way that we're eating at home was better than the way that we were eating when we were out with our dad. And when we were 15 or 16 years old, I think around 15, we decided ourselves to become vegetarians. So really, like our mother, she was very wise not to force us to be vegetarian. She didn't rebuke us, or she didn't scold us when she found out that we ate meat with her dad. She didn't do any of that. But she was very proactive in cooking us plant-based when we're at home, and just putting resources in our hands that helped us educate ourselves on what is a good way to eat. And you'd be surprised. We're 13, 14-year-olds. We're reading Ellen White on diet and foods. You might not think that kids would do that, but we read that book and we understood what she was saying, and it made sense. It was like a light bulb went off in our minds, in our young minds. It's like, wow, this makes sense, right? So that was our experience, and maybe that's the way that we can approach it with some of the parents here. Don't be intimidated by your kids initially complaining, because that's what kids are going to do, right? But eventually they'll grow out of it. I mean, they're kids, right? And their taste buds are changeable, but also be proactive in educating them about why this is important, and try to help them to make their own decision.
Wonderful. Lovely. Thank you. And also, a lot of children today especially, suffer from allergies. Allergies to all sorts of things. And one of the things that is spoken about a lot pertaining to that is dairy, intake of dairy products. Any suggestions around that or any comments on that, please?
Yeah, when people have allergies, one of the first things that needs to go is dairy. Absolutely. So yeah, I recommend cutting out dairy as much as possible. Now it's very easy. There's a lot of plant-based versions of all sorts of stuff like yogurt, plant-based milk. So it's very easy to replace. And calcium is not an issue on a plant-based diet. So I think you're right. Cutting out dairy is definitely a good idea.
So would you suggest cutting out dairy irrespective, even if you don't have allergies, because of what it can do to the body?
Well, I think right now, I think it is smart. It is a good thing to cut off dairy, regardless. Yeah. Now it's interesting. Ellen White was not a vegan.
Mhm.
People feel like
No, she wasn't.
she was not a vegan, but she did say she was a vegetarian. But she did say there's going to come a time where the animals are so diseased that we have to cut out even dairy and eggs.
We're there.
And I believe that we're there, yes. So I think each one of us has to decide for ourselves. But I think definitely, like during Ellen White's time, Ellen White owned cows, but my presumption is that her cows are healthy. So if I were back in Ellen White's day, I wouldn't mind drinking some milk. You know what I mean, for her cows, right? But right now, you better believe that these cows are messed up. All right, and so the cheese and all the yogurt and stuff that we get from these cows, it's it's not good. And scientific evidence is just showing that dairy is linked with prostate cancer and other cancers as well. So I really recommend just cutting off dairy, at least in this time, in this day and age right now. I think is a good time to cut that out.
Thank you so very much. And at this point, I'm just going to close off. Is there any other question? Any comments from anyone? Brother, anybody else? Okay. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Chu. And I think when we leave here realizing that this complete unit that we call our body belongs to God, our creator. He came down and he died for us. He died to redeem us from sin. We will submit to looking after it in totality, resting well, drinking plenty of good, clean water, exercising and things like that, eating properly. And I'm learning now that even the very material that makes our clothing has toxins in it that is absorbed through the skin, being the largest organ, and can cause all kinds of health issues as well. So, we need to be very careful that 1 Corinthians 10 verse 31 is practiced. And it says, so whether you eat or drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. I want to thank everyone who was on here today, everyone who asked questions and shared, and Dr. Chu especially. Thank you so much for being on here. And at this point, if there are no more questions, no more comments, I would like, Dr. Chu, I'm going to ask you to pray to close for us, please, as you're still there. Thank you so much, if you don't mind.
All right, yeah, let's pray together. Lord, I want to pray that first you keep the Ajax STA Church family safe and healthy, their friends and loved ones. I pray, Lord, that if there's any of us here who have been convicted to make some changes in our lifestyle, that you would strengthen us, Lord, to do it. It's a hard journey, but through your strength, we can live according to your health principles.
Yes.
And for all of us, Lord, I ask that you would help us to share this information with others. You have called us to use health ministry as an opening wedge, and I pray that each one of us will do that work. You did that for our family, and I pray that each one of us can be agents to bless others.
Yes.
Especially with this second wave coming, we want to pray that you help all of us to be ready to face it, Lord. This we want to pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Chu. And everyone, please be careful how you eat. Be sure to eat what's going to boost your immune system so that you can be more able to be protected from the upcoming second pandemic wave. God bless you. Thank you again very much.
Before we close off, I just want to say on behalf of the church leadership, thank you to the health ministry department, Lavasel and the team for a day well spent, a day of edifying us with the word of God through health. I pray that this ministry continues to do well and continues to bring us information as to how we treat our bodies, which is the temple of God. So again, thank you to the Ajax ministry, for our health ministry, for all that they have done today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ella.
Thank you for joining us at Ajax SDA Community Church online presence via Zoom. Please remember that if you are in need of prayer, please call our 24-hour prayer line at 647-271-1173. If you would like Bible studies or are requesting baptism, please call our personal ministries leader at 416-999-3786. We would love to hear from you and appreciate your feedback about our sessions. Please email us at info@ajaxsda.com. Please remember to invite your friends and family members to log on to our sessions. We look forward to you joining us again, and may God continue to richly bless you and favor you until we meet again.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to close the room now.